Welcome to the Visible and Unstoppable podcast, supporting women to build the confidence to be seen and sell. And today I have a very, very special guest, Kristal DeSantis. And Kristal is a licensed marriage and family therapist, TEDx speaker, co-founder of the non-profit Strong, and she is also the author of Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. Thank you for joining us, Kristal.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Kristal, can you share a little bit more about your story, how you came to specialize in relationships and men's mental well-being?
Yeah. So I I actually started going to therapy because of my struggles in relationships. So, I didn't really know therapy was a thing. I didn't um grow up in a culture where therapy was something that was normalized, that was talked about. So I didn't really know it was an option. But when I met my husband and we started dating, I realized that I didn't know how to make a long-term relationship work. And so I Googled, marriage, family, therapy, like, what do I do? And I found a marriage and family therapist. And so I started going to therapy and then realizing, like, oh, wow, this is really helpful and this is fascinating. And so that really led me on my journey to being a therapist myself and trying to help others in their relationships.
Beautiful. And so I'm sure you've seen many different couples and relationship issues,
Hmm.
but are there any trends that you see, especially within professional women, that come to you for
Hmm.
support in their relationships?
Absolutely. And that was something that really stood out to me the most when I was studying marriage and family therapy and doing my own work of, how do I have a relationship as a modern woman who also wants a career? Because the way I grew up, my mom was a stay-at-home parent and my dad was the financial provider. It was a very traditional setup. And I knew I didn't necessarily want that for myself, but I didn't know what else the options were out there. Um, and I think that's what I'm seeing with a lot of like modern career women now is kind of at that same intersection of like, okay, we don't necessarily want to have the same relationships that we saw maybe our parents model, but what are our options now? um, when everything is in flux, right? The gender roles, it's not like they were very clearly defined back in the day, right? If you were a woman, this was your path. If you were a man, this was your path. Um, and that's what I'm seeing right now is kind of these professional women trying to figure out, well, maybe I want some of this and I want some of this, but I don't want to get shoehorned into one or the other. How do I have it all? How do I do both? How do I do everything? And it's a lot, especially when men are not necessarily having that same conversation yet. It still is a little bit
Absolutely.
lopsided. Yeah.
And so, because there has been such a huge change in roles, and I feel like in such a short period of time,
Hmm.
especially kind of within our generation, shall I say, obviously we're
Hmm.
so super young still. But within our generation, there's been huge changes in roles and expectations of women. With
Yes.
this huge shift and change, how have you seen that impact people's relationships?
It's been huge because what the modern couple is struggling with generally that I see is being on the frontier of unexplored territory, right? It's like, okay, the old model doesn't exactly work for the modern couple, but there are no like relational mentors or leaders who can guide us with their wisdom. And so, it's kind of this, I think, they've used this term in other ways, but like the sandwich generation of like, we are wanting to lead our children and, our younger siblings or the people, the generations like our own children of like, this is how to be in a healthy relationship, but also not having the mentorship of, people that necessarily we can look to for how do we do that as a when maybe the way they were successful in relationships doesn't work for what the modern woman is looking for, which is not just financial support, but emotional support, partnership, connection, intimacy. Like that is a whole new frontier. And it's challenging. Like a modern couple is really at least right now, this generation, we're really kind of on the front edge of like, okay, the old way is being deconstructed, but we're also being asked to lead this new generation into a future that's not built yet. So it's really challenging. And
Yeah.
I mean, on the other side, though, I see it as very hopeful because I'm like, look, you get to write your own rules for relationships. You're not stuck in these pigeonholes of like, this is what women do and this is what men do. So, for the couple that wants to write their own future, hey, it's kind of there for the taking. So I find that really exciting when it comes to doing couples work. Like in my office, it's like, look, there are no rules anymore, which can feel really scary, but it can also be a great thing because you get to design your relationship like exactly how it's going to work for you. So,
I
yeah.
love that because I come across quite a few of my clients where, they're building these businesses,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires your time and your energy and your focus to be able to actually build something that's sustainable. And what often when we dig down deeper, it's usually that they say, well, I just don't have the time. And when we dig even deeper, it's they're also being the emotional carekeeper of their,
Mm-hmm.
not just their, children, but also of their partners. And they're still trying to
Mm-hmm.
maintain all these traditional roles of they're doing
Mm-hmm.
90% of the housework and the care and not just the cleaning and the cooking, but that mental load of
Mm-hmm.
organizing all the kids' sports and the Christmas presents and the who needs to be here and all of that too. And
Mm-hmm.
I can find as well that typically there's also a lot of resentment that builds in those relationships. So they're also carrying not just an emotional load for their
Mm-hmm.
partner, but they're carrying very heavy resentment for having to essentially do it all and be all, which is what I think at some point in feminism we fought for. We could do it all, we could be it all. And now we have it. We're like,
Totally.
we don't want it.
Totally.
We don't want to do it all. We
Well,
don't want to be it all. Or we
and
want to
and
have
I
it on our terms at least.
mm-hmm,
And so for those
exactly.
women who are struggling, from a relationship
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
perspective, because obviously this impacts them, not just their business, but their relationships, what
Mm-hmm.
kind of advice or strategies could you give them so that they are be able to create more time for themselves and their business, but
Mm-hmm.
also to be able to let go of some of that resentment so they can build these healthier relationships?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, right? It's like women were told growing up that they could be everything. Um, but the problem is that one person can't do everything by themselves, right? It's like we do need support. And what's happened is like women have been told like, oh, you could be like your dad, or you could be like your mom, or you could be a combination of both, or hey, you could be your mom and your dad. Like you can have the career and you can be full-time parent. And that's just not true. There's just not enough hours in the day. Like you said, there's not enough energy. And so the other side of that is men needed to have the same message sent to them, that men can be anything and men can also take on the jobs that traditionally were women's roles. And they did not get that same message. So women got more freedom, but also more responsibility to be everything. Whereas men are still kind of getting the same message that like focus on having a good career and then find a good woman and she'll kind of complete you and help your life be whole. Whereas women are kind of getting the message of like, I have to be whole on my own because nobody is going to be able to show up in the same way that I can. And so that's where I see a lot of women getting very resentful. Is like, why do I have to be everything to everyone on every level? And my partner, my male partner, hasn't gotten the same message. So he's not doing the same thing. He doesn't feel the same burden. He doesn't feel the same responsibility. And sometimes society and other people are still applauding him for doing just like maybe what his dad did, maybe a little bit more. Whereas the women are saying like, I'm doing everything. I'm not just doing the basics. I'm like busting through walls and and all of that. Um, and so I think part of the dialing down the resentment is also kind of going back to, first of all, is your partner willing to work with you? I think that's really important, right? Sometimes there's a perception of like, well, he's not gonna want to be equal because what's in it for him, right? If his life is easier because he's only doing half and I'm doing all of it and I'm burnt out, that's often where I see, well, first we have to challenge that narrative. Do you have someone who actually wants to be your partner? Or is he someone who has no interest in that because right now his life is better because you're doing everything? Right. So that's kind of the first one. And the second one is, stop doing things automatically and putting things automatically on your plate. Um, that's sometimes really hard for especially really high functioning women. It's like, well, if I don't do it, it doesn't get done. And it's like, yes, but if you're going to do it with like resentment, is it worth doing? Like, is maybe the cost too high? Um, and I think just going back to the drawing board of like a lot of couples, whether they mean to or not, and most don't mean to, is because, they start off like, okay, we're egalitarian. Let's say we both met when we had careers, we met in the workplace, we both had our own apartment. So it felt very equal. But let's be honest, the reality of, biology and then having children and then, becoming sometimes having to take a step back from the workforce, and or the lack of support for, paternal leave, et cetera, it sometimes forces women into this default, primary parent or default caretaker position, and that's not what they ever intended. And sometimes that's not at all what their partner ever intended either. So sometimes the resentment is being shoved into a role that they did not want, they did not plan for, it was not intentional, they ended up here. And so sometimes it's going back to that drawing board and saying, okay, so if that doesn't work, what does partnership actually look like? And let's come back and sit down and say, if there's something on your plate that you're doing because you feel like it's obligation or ended up there, is there a way to restructure this system? So it's not just an ongoing cycle of resentment. Yeah, you have to restructure the whole system.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing a lot now, whether it's more just because we're exposed to the internet, right? Or, we're seeing a lot now around this narrative that there are more women either opting to stay single or
Mhm,
to leave relationships and not enter new ones. Is
mhm.
that something that you're also seeing in your field?
Yeah. And I think what I'm seeing is partially because of that, right? Is that because the expectation is that when you're in a relationship, you still are expected to do all of these quote unquote traditional female roles. And then as a woman, if you want to be empowered and take on more stuff, well, that's on you. Like you're making your life harder for your own sake. Right. And so that's what I'm often seeing with women is like, well, if that's the attitude, then I might as well just like make life easier on myself and just not not do all of that, not take all of that on, which is unfortunate because women, like anybody, want relationships. As humans, we want to be in relationships, but we don't want to be in relationships that make our lives worse or make our lives harder, or relationships in which there isn't a shared ownership or a true partnership. And I think that's what I'm hearing. It's not that women are over relationships, they're over unequal relationships. They're over relationships in which there is no shared partnership, in which there is no shared ownership. They're over relationships in which they're expected to take on the bulk of the caretaking, the nurturing, the investment, the intention, the planning. That's what women are opting out of. It's not because they don't want partnership or they don't want to fall in love or be, romanced or be romantic. Um, it's the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from young children, we're pretty much conditioned from everything we watch to look for the man to fall in love. But obviously, painting this picture that once you find the man, your life will be easy and you'll be whisked off your feet, which is not always,
Hmm.
the case. But As we've seen
Yeah.
a lot of shift and change in the roles of women, traditionally what I
Mhm.
also hear is the men's identity is often, you're the protector and you're the provider. And
Mhm.
as this is now shifting in the sense that women, I mean, you can provide more than financially, right? But typically in the
Mhm.
past, this is what it meant. I pay the bills,
Mhm.
therefore I'm providing. There was not really an
Mhm.
expectation of anything above that in terms of
Mhm.
provision. But now women are earning their own money. And so it's not necessarily the financial provision. And
Mhm.
also, unfortunately, the reality is with the cost of living that for the majority of people, one wage
Mhm.
is actually not enough to provide for someone to stay at home and care for
Mhm.
children, whether you want it or
Absolutely.
not. And so
Yeah.
that idea of being the provider and the protector, which is often
Mhm.
associated with a male identity. Have you
Mhm.
seen that impacting at all in the way of like men's mental health or how
Absolutely.
they feel they need to be showing up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the missing half of this conversation, which is why I really focused when I became a therapist of like working on or like specializing in working with men. Even though I'm a woman, even though I went to therapy initially for my own kind of relationship and all of that, was because when I went into the field, I was like, here are all these women talking about like female empowerment and about the next phase of what it means to be a woman and all of this. And when I would talk to my, boyfriend and now my husband, um, like men were not getting that same message. Men were still getting that message that like you get a good job and you get physically strong, you work on your fitness and your finances and that will make you a good catch. And then I would go over here and talk to my female friends and like, what I was all these professional women and I was like that's not what women are looking for at all. So there was this massive disconnect. And that's a huge problem right now with men's mental health is because, you know, that's what they've been told. And that's still a lot of the messaging that goes to men. Like if you go in men's, self-help stuff, it's all fitness and finances. You can find a gym for every, type of guy who wants any kind of, there's, biohacking for men. There's, crypto, stuff for men. Like everything is about finances and fitness, and nothing about like what does it mean when your partner is equally financially successful, or what does it mean when she doesn't need you to physically protect her and punch a guy out? Like, what does it mean to be an emotional protector? Or, same thing with being a parent is. Back in the day, it was like, okay, if your wife wanted kids and you were like, your job was to be virile and fertile and give her children. Your job wasn't to parent the kids. It was, maybe punish them if your wife was like, hey, this one is, needs the disciplinarian. And so that was another thing of like, women are also now looking for men to be parenting partners. And that wasn't at all being talked about for men. Um, and so I think this is a huge issue that that's what my nonprofit is really focused on, of helping kind of spread awareness of how men are not getting that same message, which is absolutely what needs to happen if we're going to evolve together as a society, right? It's like women are being told that they can be everything, and men are still getting the one track message of like, just bring a fat wallet. That's all women want. Bring a hot body. That's all women want. If you're 6 feet tall, perfect, right? And it's just inadequate and it's not enough. And men need to be getting that encouragement societally to redefine what it means to be a protector, a provider, and a procreator when you have a partner who might be your financial equal, or maybe she earns more, or a partner who doesn't need you to, yeah, get in a bar fight, but she needs emotional protection. Maybe she has a trauma background. What are you going to do to show up as a safe, man who she can be vulnerable with? How are you going to protect her emotions, her feelings, her boundaries? And so that's a whole, like, I mean, that's what I'm very passionate about, is focusing on like, what do men need? How can we get them to, you know, become better partners so that we can all
And I
evolve
think you're
together?
I think you're right when you mention that this is often the missing part of the conversation, because I do often hear women, complaining about their partners or that they're carrying the load. And especially as a lot of the women that I talk to, they've done a lot of work on themselves. They've
Mhm,
really invested in their own personal development and their healing journey. And one of their
mhm,
other complaints is, well, my partner hasn't, or they're not
mhm,
willing to, or they're just not
mhm,
showing up in the same way. And it almost
mhm,
creates this kind of division. And again, that resentment, right? I'm doing all the work, not just the
mhm,
physical load, but the emotional load to carry us
mhm.
through. So,
Totally.
how do we, both as women and as men, to do their own work, right,
Mhm,
support our men so that those spaces are also available? Not in the
mhm.
sense of like, you must go on this
Sure.
journey, right? Because that's not the answer, but to help
Mhm.
support them around this shift in conversation around identity. Like, what does that mean to
Yeah.
show up together in partnership rather
Mhm.
than this is me and this is you? And we're almost in like this conflict. How do
Yes.
we bridge that gap?
And I think that's what's been a tough needle to thread, right? Because often, right, when people get scared, when we're stressed, our nervous system kind of wants to go into all or nothing. In that, like, if men start getting attention, then that means women aren't. If we start talking about, well, let's have, more advocacy for men's needs, then it's like, well, what about women's needs? What about all the unaddressed, stuff that women still have? And so I think just really getting away from that, because that's something that I also noticed is, you know, men and women have very different experiences in the way that they're socialized. And so, even like what I was saying in going to grad school and recognizing that there are so many therapists that were women. And, sometimes men, they wanted to talk to a male therapist. And I would be searching my database like, gosh, where are some male therapists who are, maybe open, taking clients, any in this area, and just the discrepancy. And same thing where, like, a woman might be saying like, well, I'm dealing with this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got a great book on that. Or, oh, there's a great, support group that meets on Tuesdays. Let me send it to you. And just the discrepancy in the resources available for men was stark. So even when men wanted to do the work, sometimes it was like, oh gosh, well, where do I send you? Where do I put you? What do I offer you? And so that was also why I wrote my book for men, because I was like, gosh, I want to be able to give them something that they can work on and feel like they're not just completely invisible. Because it's so interesting when we think about representation, and we know how important it is, and we've fought for it in so many other ways, right? Of like, making sure that you can see yourself like on screen, right? Or we fought for visibility for, different communities. And when it comes to mental health, like, do men see themselves as part of the mental health community, or do they see mental health and self-care as exclusively marketed toward and like available to women? Which has also been part of the stigma, right? It's like, oh, if you need therapy, you're weak. You're not really a man. A real man could figure it out himself. And it's like, but that's just not true. But if that's like the double stigma also coming from, the therapy community or from their partners, well, we've put them in a little bit of a double blind here. So for me, it's all about advocacy for, let's get more men in the heal fields, like men representation in, being teachers, being, nurses, being therapists, being social workers, advocacy for men's groups that really, empower men to be more vulnerable and emotional, but in their own way, not in the way that women are like, oh, but this is how we like to bond. It's like, yeah, but that's not how men like to bond. Is that okay? And I think that can be a tricky thread, because I think there's so much, fear and threat. What's that going to mean? Is that going to be a positive thing? Is that going to turn into a really toxic, negative thing? Right? You hear about some of these men's communities that are just like really hateful and toxic. Um, and so I think that's a lot of what's happening right now. Is like, yes, we want it, but feels still really scary.
Absolutely. And like you said, there's often like this divide still. It's like women over here, men over here, as opposed to
Hmm.
like, how do we bring that together? Because ultimately, like, men and women do want to be together. They do want to
Mhm,
work together. They
mhm,
do want to build families together. But then
mhm,
within those family units, there's often this, like I said, build up of resentment and frustration
mhm,
and ultimately breakdowns of relationships. And when you were talking about before, some of the differences, right, of men, their version of vulnerability might be very different to women and how we like to express things. And so
mhm,
one of the things I also find with, women is the things that they want or their needs that aren't met are often because of this lack of understanding. So, when a woman says,
mhm,
I want him to support me, for example, it's not that the man's not supporting her, it's that it's not
mhm,
supporting her in a way that she needs to be supported or feels,
mhm,
and vice versa, right? There'll be ways
mhm,
in which men are feeling like their needs are not seen or heard, not necessarily
mhm.
because they're not, but because they're not in the way that they perceive them. And so,
Exactly.
from your experience specializing with working with men, what are some of the key character differences do you find between men and women? And how do we bridge that gap so that men and women can better understand how to support their partners and also ask for what they need?
Mhm. Yeah, so actually this one is, maybe it's just the one that came to mind. It's very simple. I use it all the time with couples, and I have it in my book as well as, like, the 4 positions of conversation is, again, this talking about socialization of, like, there's position 1, which is listening, and position 2, which is empathy, joining, position 3, which is fixing, and position 4, which is debating. And I think one of the things I emphasize with men and women is you are in a cross-cultural relationship. Like, you have been socialized in 2 different cultures. And so in order to communicate, you're going to have, um, the awareness that speaking louder in your language, it's like when you're a tourist and you go to another country and you speak louder in your language, it doesn't make other people understand you. It just makes you kind of come off as a jerk, right? And so kind of approaching it from that perspective of like, neither of these positions are wrong, but if your partner is coming to you hoping for some listening and you offer a good, healthy debate, like she's not going to feel heard, right? And the same thing is like if your husband's coming to you hoping for like maybe a solution and you just offer empathy, he might also feel a little bit unmet, right? And so I think that's one of the kind of classic things because what I find is women are often socialized to connect with each other in positions 1 and 2, right? If your girlfriend calls you and she's like, "Oh, I've had a rough day," you're like, "Tell me," right? And then she says something and you're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Like, I give you empathy, like, "Oh, I've been there. Gosh, that's so hard," right? And then offer some support. Whereas what I've experienced in talking to men is like, they're like, "I would never call my friend for that." Like, I would call him if I'm like, "Hey, do you have a hammer?" Like, I'm gonna come over and grab one. Or they debate with each other, right? They like sit around and tell each other how, "Oh, you're wrong. You're terrible. You're terribly wrong." And, and that's the banter that they often experience is very bonding. And so really just recognizing that, being willing to not say that like, your way is wrong and my way is right, but recognizing that when you're communicating with somebody in a different culture, making sure that you're in the same conversation at the same time, and also developing the skills on the opposite side that you might not have, or that you might not experience as bonding. But if your husband wants to, like throw some ideas around with you, like, do you have the skills to do that? And then also on the other side, if, you know, your wife needs to be heard and empathized with, do you have the skills to do that? And that's often where, like on a very basic level, when it comes to communication, where people often say, "Oh, we have communication issues." I'm like, well, let's start by being in the same conversation at the same time. Like, are we in position 1 or are we in position 3? Which conversation are we having? Are we fixing something? Are we listening? Are we debating something? Are we empathizing? Be in the same conversation at the same time. Let's start there.
Absolutely. That's so valuable because I feel like so many women right now are like, I just wanted him to listen and
Mhm.
agree. And there he is trying to fix all the problems. And you're like, no, no,
Right.
no. I didn't need you to fix
Mhm.
anything. I just need to complain about it. I'm sure many
Mhm.
men are sat there going like, what are you complaining about if you don't want me to do anything about it? Right.
Exactly, exactly. And so that, again, it makes, the women feel like, okay, he doesn't care about meeting my needs. And for the man, it's like, gosh, like she's just trying to make my life hard by complaining and pointing out all these things that I'm not doing. It feels like, why am I subjecting myself to criticism? And on her side, she's like, I'm just trying to be heard. Why doesn't he care enough to listen to me? Um, and so really kind of, I guess the way that I work with that is like, look, neither of these skills are bad and wrong. And sometimes the stories you're writing in your head is what's making you resentful, or that's what's causing the issue. Whereas let's just focus on, can you name which conversation or which position you need your partner to be in? Can you ask for what you need? And then does your partner have the skills to actually meet that need? And if not, are they willing to learn that skill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's about starting. I know I learned with my husband that I start the conversation with, I don't need you to do anything.
Hmm.
Right.
Exactly.
I just want to rant at you for this thing, not
Hmm.
at him for something he's done, but maybe it's something about my day that I just
Totally.
want you to listen. I don't want you to do anything,
Hmm.
because otherwise he has this expectation that he tries to fix something that he knows nothing
Hmm.
about and has no
Totally.
control over. And you
Hmm.
sit there going, no. And so I think sometimes it is just having that, being very clear about what it is that you want from the other person, so that
Hmm.
the expectation is often just there and they can understand.
Absolutely.
But I love how you're saying about, the different capacity. Not everyone has been taught. We weren't grown up with great communication skills. I'm finding for most, myself included,
Mhm,
had to learn a lot. But especially along my clients, we come from, again, a generation where it was not necessarily where we watched our parents have real discussions. It was often like
mhm,
when the kids were in bed, or
mhm,
you only got the little bits of resentment or the little,
mhm,
outbursts that might come. And so you weren't taught how to have these real connected conversations as
mhm.
opposed to just talking at each other.
Totally, totally. Because also I do wanna highlight something else of like, also when it comes to really professional, high-powered women, I've also seen that same challenge is that when their husband is like, "Hey, I just wanna vent," or, "I just wanna share something," that it can also be a little bit, like, anxiety inducing of like, like wanting to fix because that's what they do so much at work. And then also then being resentful that like they feel like they're being forced into manager mode of like, why do I have to now tell you what to do? Or why do I now have to solve this problem for you? When maybe that's again not what he needed at all. Maybe he just wanted to be heard and empathized with. Right. And so, men have those same needs. And I think that's also a big part of the conversation is, are you a safe person to be vulnerable with? Um, or do you also kind of maybe there's still a lot of women that have a lot of discomfort with male vulnerability. They experience it as like one more thing, right? Like, ugh, one more thing, emotional labor. Like, here's one more thing. And so I think that's also something we have to be honest about is like, do you have the capacity to hold what your husband is bringing you? If you want more vulnerability, what do you do with it? Right.
Mm, absolutely. And so, other than buying your book, which obviously we all need to do because we all need to learn how to communicate, and also what a great gift for our loved ones.
Mhm.
It could be that subtle Christmas gift if you're trying to prompt your partner into that journey of, self development and mental well being. Is there any key, I guess, message from your book or key takeaway that you would love to share with the women today?
I think a big thing, and this is something, yes, if you get my book and you're like, I'm a woman, should I leave it out for my husband? Often what I've found is, or if you're a single woman and you're like, why should I read this book? Sometimes what I find is that it helps give women the language to explain to their husband what they're looking for when they mean, I want you to be emotionally supportive or I want to feel more connected. Is that's the benefit is having a shared language because I think that's again going back to the old map is obsolete, but the new map is ambiguous. and not everybody has the same landmarks. And so that's something that I would say is be proactive. If you're not in the relationship that is fulfilling for you, if it's not working, um, how can you start designing what type of relationship it is you want from a place of, again, a vision of a shared partnership? Because often then what I see is women go to the other extreme of like, well, I'll design my perfect life and my perfect relationship with myself without my partner, right? Which is valid, right? If your partner is not interested in being, you know, a co-journeyer on this, road with you, fair. Um, but I also see that that challenge for women is like they know how to be subsumed into relationship and they know that that's not what they want, but they also don't necessarily know how to be in a shared partnership because they've never seen it modeled. Right. And so that is also a challenge sometimes of like, if you're, frustrated with what you're in, which is like, it feels too oppressive, it feels too, subsuming. But do you know what it would look like and what you would have to do differently in order to be in a relationship where you actually have room for another person? Or is it kind of one extreme to the other, right? And so I talk about this also of like there's codependence and there's independence. Neither of those are good relationship models. The real goal, the challenge is interdependence, right? Where you are a full, whole person, but you also have the capacity to be in partnership. And sometimes that means not being totally, fully everything exactly the way you want it. And so that's a little bit of yeah, what I would say.
Beautiful. That's so helpful. So before we leave, I think you also had a special gift for our listeners, which is a free strong mini toolkit. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Mhm. Yeah, so I have in the first chapter of my book, and so Strong is the name of my book, it's the name of my practice, and it's an acronym of, when I was like, okay, there's no blueprint for a healthy relationship. Well, what do I know based on my research and my education? And so the first pillar of a healthy relationship is safety. So that's the S in strong. And so in the mini toolkit, I break safety down into 4 S's of self-awareness, right? Knowing yourself, knowing what your needs are in a relationship, stability. What are you looking for when it comes to building a stable life with a partner? Self-regulation, like what do you do when you get flooded, when you get upset? Like how do you like work with calming your nervous system? And then self-expression. So I have a little like emotion wheel, like expression toolkit in there. And so that's kind of the basic kind of 4 S's of safety, which is that first pillar of what a healthy relationship needs. So yeah, it's got, a couple of reflection prompts, a couple of visual exercises so that people can start to practice these skills.
Beautiful. And I will link that here, whether you are listening on the podcast or you are watching us. I'll link that so you can grab it. And where can we find your Kristal?
I am on Instagram at ATX Therapist because I'm in Austin, Texas. My website is just strong.love. And my book is on Amazon and Audible for those who prefer to listen.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much, Kristal, for sharing all your wisdom. I know so many women right now who are going to be buying that book and downloading your free gift because they're like, I'm ready to create something new. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
giving us your time.
absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And, just kudos to all the women out there that are trying to, be pioneers in this new era of what it means to be a modern woman who's also in partnership. It's a lot. So, a little bit of encouragement, a lot of love. And also, I like to always end with hope, right? Is hope for a better future, but also plan for the skills to get there.